Today, I kind of wanted to make this more inclusive to our children who specifically have those more social and emotional learning needs. And it's a big umbrella term because there are a lot of children with disabilities, of various disabilities that fall under this bracket, which we're going to touch on a little bit. But for those of you who didn't attend our part one of the masterclass, what we covered was that building rapport and creating that positive and safe learning space is very, very crucial when you're a Maxi coach, right? When we're partnered with children with social and emotional learning needs and intellectual developmental disabilities, the rapport building process often takes just a little bit longer. And sometimes it needs to be tailored or changed or adapted just to suit those specific learning needs of the child. So working with children with special needs can often be daunting, right? Sometimes it can be a little overwhelming because some of the situations might seem impossible. The importance of providing that safe, comfortable, and engaging environment for them, it can't be overstressed. That is the number one thing that we should focus on when we find out that a child we're going to be partnered with might have more complex needs. And it's especially true when they're involved in learning to move their bodies, right? They're learning to move their bodies in ways that they've never been able to do before. They've never experienced, right? So the body movement actually opens up the opportunity for them to self-express, right? Self-expression, which also gives them that access to be able to build up on social skills, build those emotional and physical experiences, and learn how to communicate that way as well. So creating a positive environment for a child with special needs doesn't require you to be a specialist whatsoever, but there are important factors to consider like patience, attention, and foresight, because the environment just doesn't happen. You have to create it. And it takes a little bit of thinking, a little bit of planning beforehand and acting on those thoughts and plans just to make sure that the child with the special needs in your class or in your session get the most from your experience, right? And as Maxi Mind coaches, we know that each child that we work with is individual, unique, and special. But what is it that we mean by special needs children, right? It's such a broad term used to describe children that have behavioral or emotional disorders, developmental needs, or learning disabilities. These children all require extra assistance in their lives. And they come to us because the parents are looking to improve motor, communication, social, self-help skills, and definitely those cognitive skills, right? That they aren't able to get at school. That's why they come to us. So the biggest thing that we learned in our last session was inclusive rapport building, right? It broadens out to everybody. So what we learned is sometimes that when we're doing all the right things, when it comes to rapport building, sometimes it just doesn't move along the way that we want it to, right? We have this idea in our mind of where we want to go, and that's totally normal. And it's a natural part of the process. So I want to stress that if the rapport building with a child with special needs is taking a little bit longer, it is completely normal and it's okay. And you're going to build that relationship with them eventually. It's just going to take some time. And what we targeted last time was being mindful of 3 specific factors, right? There's 3 specific variables that are going to influence building rapport with all children. So what we covered last time was age, emotional state, and disability, right? Being mindful of a child's age, especially if they have their physical age, but their developmental age might be different, right? So it's always important to kind of dig a little bit to find out what kind of age they might be operating at cognitively so that we can prepare our activities appropriately. And it's also important to know if they do have an intellectual disability, right? Those social, physical, intellectual, and emotional skills, they might not match their chronological age. So we might need to take strategies that are at a lesser level or for a lesser age group so that they could connect with them. Secondly, when we go to emotional state, right, we're talking about their emotional maturity. We want to provide opportunities for them to have feelings check-ins, right? So that you can kind of assess their level of compliance right when they get in that door in regards to how they're feeling, that level of feeling. And the emotional maturity is important to kind of take in as well. If you're kind of noticing that they're based on their chronological age, that emotionally they're a lot lower. You want to be able to have appropriate coping skills. So when they're frustrated or they can't explain or they can't label those feelings, you have the specific strategies to be able to handle those frustrations, right? And you want to make sure you pick the right strategies that are appropriate for their level. So you might need to incorporate more visuals, and incorporating visuals just creates that opportunity to encourage more communication, right? Which a lot of children who have specific special needs, they really struggle with communication, or they might be nonverbal and they might have no communication. So allowing visuals and stuff like that can help put in place those communication skills that they're lacking. And then lastly, we have our disability. And that's the key point that we're focusing on today, right? It's important to remember that everyone, regardless of their disability, is unique. And it's important to take the time to understand their communication style, because you're going to be interacting with them every day, right? You want to optimize your efforts of communicating with them. So you want to be able to bring in strategies that you maybe have never tried before, because it's going to benefit that child. And for a lot of children with learning disabilities, it's important to remember when you're communicating with them, you're going to speak slowly. You're going to speak clearly. You're going to use easy to use language or words so that they're really grasping every single word that you're saying and they're understanding it, right? You want to make sure that the environment's not distracting, because that will take away from any forms of communication. For example, all the fidget toys that you have, they're great for when they get frustrated or you're using them as coping skills, but you might have them tucked away so that when they come in, they're not finding opportunities to play. And you're only using them for areas of coping skills, right? So tuck them away, tuck away any preferred activities until you're ready, or you're building that into your schedule, or the child knows when it's coming. So as I mentioned before, this is our umbrella of disability. So it includes all forms, right? We have different ones that fall in different categories, but a lot of the time, if you look at the bottom of the umbrella, all of these disabilities will impact their speech and language. So communication is going to be big. So what I wanted to take in mind was we may have specific situations that I have definitely had in my sessions before. So I wanted to be mindful and share with you some of these little tweaks that we can make in our session to make it more accessible and inclusive for specific students. So when we are teaching children with hearing impairment, you want to make sure that you're supporting your verbal instructions with print or with visual aids, right? Using those visual pictures to back up the words that you are using, just in case anything gets lost in translation. And you want to make sure you have those materials in advance. It's the best time to take is with the parents when you first meet them. How do they communicate with their child? What do they find beneficial? What do they find not working, right? You should always be asking those questions, because if communication is a problem for the parents as well, you know that using these strategies will be more successful, and you could also share them with the parents. And one of the biggest things is to allow tactile exploration in your environment. So make sure you're pairing those objects with visuals, right? If you have a picture of the beanbag and you're trying to show them a schedule of what you're doing, you can have on the wall a piece of Velcro and you have pictures of beanbag, pendulum, ball, blocks, and then maybe a puzzle, whatever activity they want at the end. It's a visual schedule that they're allowed to see. And when you're pairing it, you could show them the picture and then you could show them the actual object, right? Now we're going to be doing beanbag. You show them the picture and then you give them the beanbag, right? You're reinforcing that communication through visuals and through prompts, and it's creating clear instruction. So this is an example that I actually do in the school, because I have a lot of children with cochlear implants, and I also have 2 children that are both deaf and blind. So I have a lot of students with different specific needs. So using these strategies is often really good. First, then boards are really great for transitions. We say first we're going to be doing this LBP activity, right? And you maybe have the pendulum ball there. And then next you have their preferred activity, or you have the next activity that they're doing in sequence. You're preparing for those transitions, and you can use this strategy for anybody, even neurotypical children. We also have down on the bottom there. So I have pictures of my own. It's hard to kind of put them on the computer. So this is actually like a dance movement sequence. But what you can actually do is you can take pictures of the movements that the child is going to complete on the LBP programs or the ILS programs, just like they have in the book, except LBP, it's not visual, right? Take pictures of you doing it or the child doing it so they could see specific movements. So whenever they have trouble with a certain movement, you can show them using the visual or just put it up as a sequence, right? On the wall or on the door or on a poster. This is what we're going to be working on so that they know that through your communication, if they have any hearing impairment, they could see it visually and you just need to point and prompt what the next movement is, right? So when we're teaching children with visual impairments, the orientation changes, right? We want to understand that their mobility needs and for navigating the space is going to be different. We want to make sure that everything is clear. We don't want clutter. We don't want confusion. We want them to be able to navigate the space and feel confident. So you want to have those items that are easily accessible, right at the forefront so that they can use their independent skills to identify and select objects and materials. Children with visual impairments also need tactile exploration, right? So allow them to explore the objects so that they become familiar with them. Give them, when you first start, the opportunity to sit down, play with the bin, explore it. Ask them questions. What do you feel? What is it do you think you're holding? It depends on their their varying degree of impairment. But for children who maybe need, like specific glasses and tools, you want to make sure that they have those when they come to sessions so that they're set up for success. And you want to make sure that you're giving those verbal instructions slowly and clearly, right? So now when we are teaching children with physical disabilities, the mobility and the equipment use is huge, right? We want to make sure if they're coming in with equipment, whether they're coming in with a cane or a chair, AFOs, right? Those braces to help strengthen their muscles. We want to make sure that they have a space that they're feeling confident in and they have enough space to move around because they might need some more space. And we want to make sure that those resources are visible, they're within reach, and they're using their independence to be able to go to the objects whenever they need, right? The biggest thing is we want them to be independent. So we only want to offer help when needed or when you can see them struggling, right? And sometimes I often find instead of saying, do you need help? Because you want to promote independence, you say, instead of do you need help, you can ask them, how can I help you with that? Do you even need my help, right? Like, what can I do to help you? What should we do next, right? Try to tailor that experience for them to be independent. And then lastly, when teaching with children with intellectual disabilities, the biggest piece to remember is that transition plans are very important. So using that strategy of the first then board is very, very helpful to ensure that those transitions are a little bit smoother. You might have to take little breaks in between the tasks, or you might have to break those really long tasks into smaller steps, right? Sometimes when you're doing the LBP program, you can get to a set that is 25 to 30 tasks. That could be really big and really daunting to them. So based on their skills and their strengths, you want to pick those ones that they can do independently or need very little help first so that we could build that motivation and confidence levels up. And then we start to focus on breaking those longer tasks into smaller steps, right? Those long sequencing activities, maybe the first day we're only focusing on one or two movements. And then the next day, the other two. And then the third day, we're putting them all together. We want to build their competency levels without causing any frustration. And we do that through modeling, prompting, and immediate feedback. Verbal praise is huge and they love positive attention. So make sure that when you're explaining those different steps, you're including the beginning and the end and the middle. You're giving as much detail as possible and you're ensuring that you have that eye contact with them. That's when you know that they're listening to you and they're absorbing the information. We want to promote eye contact. Not all of them are comfortable with eye contact, but it's important to make sure you reinforce. Can you look at me when I'm speaking to you? I want to make sure that you're listening. And can you repeat the instructions back to me, especially if they're verbal? If they're not, show me what I just asked you to do, right? Some children with specific special needs, they perceive the sensory input different, right? And they might not be able to verbalize when they're not feeling comfortable. So remember to be watching their behavior because all behavior is a form of communication. And we want to look out for these behavioral differences because they're trying to communicate with us. So make sure you overuse those visual cues, right? Overuse those auditory cues and those tactile cues, something that they could feel, something that they could play with. Overuse it. We're building communication by doing that. So I have a little website here, and it has amazing, amazing visuals. So I'll be able to provide that to you. This is what I use in my day-to-day life. Let me show you a quick example. So I often have, they're actually at work right now because I use them every day. They are keychains that I put on a lanyard to help reinforce communication. So for example, if you're working with a child with autism who has trouble communicating or verbalizing, you can use these break cards and these communication cards to reinforce the behavior you want, right? If they're being too loud, you could ask them to be quiet. You could put it all in a keychain, ask them to sit on the floor. Maybe, right, we're doing an activity on the floor. Maybe you need their hands down, stuff like that. Some of them are tailored to schools. Some of them are just more of those, like you could pair the look right at your eye level. So you could say, you know, you're looking at me, or you could pair the look with the ball. You're looking at the ball, right? Reinforcing those visuals. And these are all free, which is amazing. So you could put them on a little lanyard, you could put them on a keychain, whatever you want. I just wanted to provide you guys with options. And there's tons of sequencing cards and everything like that. So you could kind of take a look and figure out what it is you need that might be helpful to you. And those are all there. So we're going to go into specifically understanding intellectual disabilities, because it is a term that's used for when a person or a child has specific limitations in their mental functioning, right? And mostly it falls under the communicating, the taking care, those independent life skills, and the social skills. And these limitations will cause the child to learn and develop a little more slowly than our typical children. So children with intellectual disabilities might take a little bit longer to reach those skills, like speaking and walking, right? Those gross motor skills come a little bit more slowly. And because they have difficulty taking care of their personal needs, sometimes they have that trouble learning in an independent learning environment, like a one-on-one session in Maxi or at school, right? They will learn, but it takes them longer, and we might have to use different approaches to reinforce the learning. So it's important to know how common intellectual disabilities are. So in Canada specifically, this was a survey done not too long ago. 5.1% of the population ages 15 and up live with a developmental disability. That's just including our teens. 3.2% of them have a learning disability as well. So oftentimes they are grouped together. There is a fine distinction between the two. And 53% of them are often diagnosed before the age of 10. So because 92% of them have that co-occurring disability, right? Maybe they have Down syndrome and they're also paired with a learning disability on top of it. Maybe they have autism and they're also paired with sensory processing disorder. There's so many disabilities that go together. And it's important to know that if they are, struggling with a specific learning disability, or they have an intellectual disability that will kind of limit them on these communication and social skills, we need to make sure that we are aware of how we can help them, because when they come into our space, we want them to be successful, right? So when we look at children with intellectual disabilities, this is what is happening at very young levels or young ages, right? So oftentimes it starts with those gross motor skills, right? They're not sitting up, crawling, or walking as fast as other children. They're learning to talk later, or they have trouble speaking. Oftentimes they end up, developing speech impairments or stuttering or any, like those kinds of issues. Or sometimes they could regress. A lot of children with autism, they are able to verbalize at a very young age, and then they might regress and lose those skills and become nonverbal or partial verbal, right? They're able to say yes, no, mom, dad, but there's no way that they can have a conversation with us. So we have to know those levels, right? And then as they get older, we start to see it in different ways. They have a hard time remembering things. So using visuals, sequencing things, breaking things up, this is how they learn. And this is how we have to teach them, because they're not going to understand, right, the social rules. They're not going to understand consequences to their actions, right? They use these behaviors, and I'm going to touch on this specifically later, as ways to avoid tasks. So we have to try to build motivation so that they're not using these behaviors to get out of working with us, right? And obviously it comes down to the problem solving skills as well, right? We're trying to boost problem solving skills and logical thinking so that they're able to have a successful time when they're with us. So to go into the more specific challenging characteristics that I experience almost on a daily basis, I work with some very high risk to severe needs children that we might not come into, connection with through Maxi Mind. But oftentimes the behaviors do become generalized between these children. And we might see it even if they're maybe not as high risk as they portray it. So specifically the characteristics that I want you to look out for is that the children with social emotional learning needs, learning disabilities or intellectual disabilities, they feel less competent and less confident than their peers. So they feel a little bit less able, and they're definitely a little bit more hesitant when it comes to advocating for their needs. So we have to teach them how to advocate for what they want. What are you experiencing, right? How can I help you feel better? I see that you're feeling frustrated. If they're having trouble with verbal or nonverbal communication, we have to provide them with outlets and opportunities to be able to communicate with us through the use of visuals or words or programs like on an iPad to be able to type it out to us. We want to be able to provide them with those opportunities to communicate so that we're able to understand their intentions, because they might not understand our intentions and our expectations. So we have to set those boundaries and we have to set those rules so that they know what to expect from us, especially when it comes to the rules of conversation and social cues. They struggle with that, and they might not be able to follow the rules of conversation, right? They might just in the middle of talking to us go off and start playing with a toy, and we're like, I'm talking to you, like I'm trying to. They don't get that. They don't know when we're starting. They don't know when we're finishing. They don't know to look at us in the eyes. They struggle with that. So we want to be able to provide them with those social cues, right? Using that keychain. Look at me when I'm speaking. It's going to help reinforce the expectations that you want from them. And sometimes, and this is my favorite challenge, is that sometimes they're too honest, and sometimes they can't conceal their weaknesses and their mistakes. So they will verbalize everything. So we have to kind of structure that conversation, right? Teach them what is appropriate to say and when to say it versus, just shouting out any whim that they want. And oftentimes every student will struggle with boredom. Children with learning disabilities become bored faster than others, especially if they have a task that they don't prefer, right? If they're given a task or they're given a task that is too easy for them, they become very bored very fast, and they won't even want to do it. So that's when we get those task avoidant behaviors or those physical behaviors like throwing objects, refusal, that kind of stuff. And I'm going to go into all of those behaviors really shortly. So the two biggest skills that are areas of opportunity that I touched base on are the adaptive skills and the transition skills, right? Those adaptive skills, they have trouble communicating, taking care of themselves, their health and safety too. I have a lot of kids who will just run off, and we are on a very busy street, and it is very scary because they don't understand the safety concerns of just running across the street, right? So at home, they might be struggling with home or living skills, those life skills, definitely social skills, understanding those rules of conversation, right? Playing a game properly, and even the reading, writing, and the learning skills. And then on top of it, we have the transition skills that go with it. So I'm going to get very specific here. So this is a really important moment to listen to, because I'm going to go to specific children with specific needs. And this is all in my experience, everything I've experienced in Maxi Mind and in the TDSB, as well as private ABA therapy. So for children with ADHD, they will have a hard time switching their attention from one thing to another. So this is where they struggle with transitions. It's especially true if they stop doing something that is rewarding for them, because their brains, an ADHD brain, reacts strongly on rewards. So a positive reward system, a token board, a sticker board, something like that that they could work towards can help ease transitions, especially for SEND boards as well. It could also help because their brains are so activated with in the reward center. You can help structure and manage the transitions by using this kind of an incentive, right? If you want to move from the LBP program into the ILS program, and there's 3 tasks that you want to do that you've set out for the day, make sure that every time they complete one task, you're giving them that stamp, giving it to them immediately, not waiting, have them involved in it so that their brains are reacting to this reward-based system, okay? And it's important to remember, if they find something rewarding, sometimes they hyper-focus on it. And that really kind of explains why they might seem a little bit all over the place, but then you ask them to play a video game and they'll get fixated on it for hours, right? If you ask them to do something less rewarding, like, can you clean up that? Or, can you go clean your room? Stuff like that. You're going to hit resistance, right? Because they don't want to be pulled away from that rewarding task, even though you're not giving them like a token or anything. You can partner the token to ease the transition from a, preferred activity to a non-preferred activity. And with children with ADHD, they have a tougher time managing their emotions than other kids. A lot of the research behind them and what I've experienced is their brains are wired in a way that they have a hard time exercising control of their emotions, right? They're often a little bit less developed than others. So you get huge emotional displays for very small problems compared to children who don't have ADHD. And we're going to touch on specific strategies for each of these issues a little bit later. So I want you to know that is specific for ADHD. Now, when we talk about children with autism, the children with autism have a hard time transitioning from one thing to another because they prefer routine and predictability. Children with ADHD have a hard time switching their attention from one thing to the other. Children with autism prefer predictable routines. They want the same thing every single day. And we know that through our Maxi Mind program, we got to change things up, right? We're trying to build those skills. So anything that takes them out of their routines can be very overwhelming for them. So it's the same for children with sensory processing issues as well. This is a co-occurring disability that look the same, and they struggle with the same challenges. So the world can it just feels overwhelming to them, right? They get confused. They have this need for sameness. They have this need for predictability, and it's actually like an adaptive and practical skill that is a positive for them. But when we're trying to transition them from one activity to another, it can become very upsetting for them. If it may feel like any deviation from the routine feels like the rug is being pulled out from under them. So in my world, I like to refer to this as cognitive inflexibility, right? It explains why children with autism or they're on the spectrum, right? They have these hyper focused interests, and they prefer to do the same thing over and over and over again. And it's hard for us as one-on-one coaches because at school, this is what we do. We teach them to do the same things over and over and over again. We're generalizing tasks for them. We're having them master these activities before they move from one level to the next, right? It's incremental for us at school. However, they might be doing this one task for 3-4 months until they get it, right? So when they come into a one-on-one session, especially the Maxi Mind program, it could be constantly changing, right? So for them, it's really hard to go from this school setting to this individual setting that's a little bit different. And any unexpected changes and these transitions can kind of disrupt their equilibrium. So that's when we end up kind of getting those behaviors. And that's an area of opportunity for them. Sorry, guys, I'm just getting over a cold. So the last point I want to check in is children with anxiety. So we have ADHD children who have a hard time switching their focus from one thing to another. We have children with autism who have a hard time doing another thing because they're preferring that sameness, right? That predictability, that routine. For children with anxiety, they're ruled by fear. And they might be afraid of what comes next, like socializing, separating from that preferred activity, not knowing what's coming next, right? Or being separated from their caregiver and moving to a new environment. So often children with OCD as well, they feel these same anxious tendencies, and they can't finish what they're doing perfectly, right? They want to do it over and over again because they're fulfilling this psychological need that is perfect. And sometimes children with autism display this as well, because anxiety does live in all of us, right? So it's going to live in these children as well. And sometimes you need to allow them time to fully complete the task before moving on to the next. Don't be worried about the time. Don't be worried about, moving, like, I need to finish all this in a day. You want them to complete those tasks to feel confident, right? They need to complete it in their own unique way so that we can reduce any anxiety of moving from one activity to the next, okay? So what do these troubles with transitions actually look like? So what we're going to be met with is it depends on the child and it depends on the setting, right? But oftentimes we're seeing resistance, we're seeing avoidance, distraction, negotiation. That's my favorite. I love the kids that try to negotiate with me when I'm trying to move from one activity to the next. They always want to do those preferred activities, right? So they will negotiate with you until they get their way. That doesn't fly with me. So I'm going to teach you some negotiation skills, or we're going to see they're going to have a meltdown, right? Some of these reactions are results of them being overwhelmed by their emotions, not being able to process it. And what I've learned that works, or what they've learned by doing these big behaviors, right, is that they're going to successfully delay or avoid the transition coming, right? So we got to understand how proper transitions look and how we can make them smooth for them, or else we're going to see these big behaviors and we're going to be stuck there for a really long time. We're not going to be able to move from one activity to the next, okay? So even though some kids might not throw a tantrum, they might be able, they might sit the whole time and whine, right? They might be distracted, and they're going to start negotiating with you. So it's important to understand that these are the negative behaviors that we're seeing when it comes to having trouble with these transitions. So since last session, we talked about making that communication work with the parents, right? Building that rapport. I'm going to briefly touch on it because I want to get to like all the juicy stuff with strategies and stuff like that, especially since we talked so much about the troubles of transition. But I want to pop in and mention a few things because building that partnership with the parents is extremely important. And life can be really challenging for a parent with a child with special needs, right? And they might not feel like they're communicating with their child effectively. So it's really, really fundamental for us to build that communication with the child and with the parent to make sure that these relationships thrive, right? Because we know that communication is not just about talking, it's just as much about listening. So when you're communicating with somebody with a disability specifically, it's important for you to just think about the tone of your voice, how your body language looks like to them so that you're reinforcing a specific, communication, and you're choosing specific words, right? So why the connection matters is the most important thing, right? When we're communicating with children with special needs, everybody's craving that attention and that connection, right? And that's what matters most. So we need to develop that connection. And it might take a little bit longer when we're dealing with a child with special needs. But despite their abilities, right, we still want them to be seen. They want to feel supported, accepted, and acknowledged. So these children are no different, right, in terms of that. And even if they struggle to communicate effectively, they still deserve that connection, right? And we have to remember that not all of them are verbal. So nonverbal communication is extremely important as well, right? And we want to be able to support them and value them, even though they're nonverbal. And we want to cater to those specific needs, right? Just because they're nonverbal doesn't mean that they can't understand us. So we have to be mindful of these different abilities that they have and find ways of communicating with them that work for them, not just for us, right? So these are my success tips for building this total communication, right? So one, we want to build encouragement. We want to be encouraging. The key to communication and this continuous learning is motivation and encouragement. So whenever I work with a child with special needs, when they're completing a difficult task or they're taking on a challenging social situation, right? I'm giving them these small rewards to make them feel motivated. Whether it's a sticker, a high five, a compliment, a token, these rewards go a long way and do a lot for their brain. And then we go right into respect, right? This is, everybody knows, we're all Maxi 9 coaches. We are respectful. We're helpful. We want to be honest, right? When you're communicating with a child that you can't understand, it's okay to ask them to stop, slow down, repeat what you're saying. And if you don't understand, let them know. Say, I'm having a hard time understanding you, because they might be receptive to that, right? And you need to find another way. Maybe you need to use those visuals. Can you show me with your body what you mean? Take me here, or take me there, wherever, right? If they're trying to communicate something to you, try to get them to express it in a different way. Taking that time to understand them will in turn, accelerate your level of care, and it'll make them feel valued. Next is to be precise, right? Some children have specific intellectual challenges, and some might be aware to us before a session, and some might become aware to us as we continue into our sessions. So it's important that we're expressing our request really clearly and really precisely, because sometimes they might not understand us. So staying calm and being ready to rephrase our request and allow for processing time, right? Allow them to sit and think about the request. Some of them take some time to process, and then they're able to be like, okay, got it. And then they're able to go on, right? If you're not allowing that processing time and you're giving them too many requests, you will overload them and you will face those negative behaviors, right? Because their brains are getting too much. If you find that the verbal requests aren't working, you might have to try a different level of prompting, okay? So you might have to try to get the most out of this interaction. You might have to ask questions. You might have to say, can you show me what you want? Can you show me what you need right now? Show me how you want to use this, right? Using those requests and those prompts. Or if you are having trouble with the child doing the activity and your verbal requests aren't working, if you're asking them to hit the ball in a straight line, you will have to use modeling. You will have to use hand over hand prompting to show them, if you hit the ball this way, it's going to go straight. And that's what I want. Then you're going to get your token. You're going to get your sticker. I want to see it over here. You might have to stand in front of them and say, can you hit the ball to my hand? Show them the path, the trajectory that you want them to hit it in, right? You're using your body as a way of communicating. And that's going to help. And that's where being precise is very important, right? We talked about allowing that transition time as well. Some children, require sign language or gestures. I use sign language because I'm comfortable and confident, and I've done the required courses to feel confident in it. However, just even using your body, right, in a way to communicate without using words, that's a form of prompting. And a lot of children with autism really benefit from this, right? And we use it as a way of communicating so that the child doesn't feel pressured to speak. So if they're unable to communicate to you what they want or what they need, ask them to show you using their body. Ask them to draw it out if they can. Ask them, just take me where you need, right? Show me what you want. Show me what you need. And the biggest thing that I like to use for any children with special needs, they're very, very sensory. They love art. They love music. So try to build in opportunities for you to have these tasks to break up the session, whether you're doing it a little bit before. Sometimes I put a little bit of calm down music as they're doing, their check-in, their feelings check-in, or we use it at the end. If we're playing a game, I ask them what type of music they like, what's a song that they listen to all the time that makes them feel happy. Put it on in the background just because it helps build, that relationship, that rapport with them. So these are going to be the specific strategies that I use when I'm with a child that has a learning disability or an intellectual disability. These are specific strategies in becoming an effective communicator. So the first thing that I do is use concrete language. When you use concrete language, you're providing the person with a clear understanding of what's being said. Without the concrete language, communication seems really vague. It's very open to interpretation. And specifically with children with special needs, they need very clear, concise wording, right? So using this concrete over very abstract language is going to really help when you're trying to communicate with them, right? You're avoiding jargon. You're avoiding, puns. You're avoiding, metaphors. Like, you're being very clear and concise with what you want and what you're looking for or what you're trying to communicate to them. So using long words is not easy, right? Even me talking to you, I have got this whole script of what I want to say, and I go off script all the time and I'm wasting time, but that's how I am. When I'm working with a child with special needs, I'm not using full sentences sometimes, right? I'm just using specific words, hit ball here, right? And you're using your body language, hit ball there, right? You're making it very tailored to the person based on their level of understanding. And when you're communicating with them, you want to follow their lead, right? If they're able to communicate to you in full sentences, then go ahead, use full sentences. You're not going to say hit ball here. You're going to say, do you mind, hitting the ball over here with your hand, with your left hand? You're building in those instructions a little bit more clearly, but that's based on your understanding of their level of communication. So make sure you're just going on their pace. You're really checking for understanding. You're watching their body language and their facial expressions, right? You could start to see if they're getting overloaded, overwhelmed. You can ask questions, right? Like, they might not be able to communicate it to you. I've had so many times where the headphones just aren't working properly. The music is only working on one side and not the other, or it's too loud, or it's too low. So make sure when you're putting the equipment on them, you're reinforcing the communication by checking in with them first. You're being proactive to avoid any issues. Is the music working okay? Is it to the level that you like? Do you need it higher? Do you need it lower? Does it feel comfortable, right? So that if you're going through the session, you're trying to be proactive in not having any of these issues come up, because then it takes away from your transition, right? And if the person, so for specifically children that are nonverbal, sometimes they might come up and grab you, right? They're going to come up and grab your hand. When they do that, I want you to stop. I want you to look at them. I want you to get on their level, and I want you to ask them to show you what they want. And if they're pulling you, go with them. This is them trying to communicate with you. Sometimes, when things pop into our mind, we have the skills to be able to be like, oh, not right now, right? I'll deal with this later. Sometimes when a child with special needs, specifically with autism, something will pop up in their mind, and the second it pops up, they need to do it. And if they're not able to communicate what they want or what they need to you, they're going to come up and they're going to grab you and they're going to try to pull you to where they want, right? This is a form of them communicating. I want you to go with them. And then if you need to transition them away, say, not right now. First, right? Use a visual. First, we're going to do this, and then we can do that, whatever pops up in their head. That's obviously reinforcing to them because they brought you to it. They were communicating with you, right? So make sure you're using these opportunities as areas of communication. So watch them, right? They might be telling you something with their body language and with their facial expressions. And for you too, you want to overuse gestures. As I'm talking to you, I'm constantly moving my hands. This is just how I work, because I know that this is how I am in my day-to-day when I'm talking with children with special needs, right? I'm overusing my gestures. I'm overusing my facial expressions, right? We can use gestures like pointing, nodding, having really focused eye contact with them so that they're understanding messages, right? We might need to over-exaggerate our gestures or prolong them, especially in the beginning when you're meeting them, to just help promote that comprehension. And you definitely want to use exaggerated nonverbals, right? Like really, really happy when they do something well, right? Try not to reinforce disappointment, right? We always want to be happy. We want to be cheerful, because gestures for children with disabilities are very necessary. So if you're asking somebody if they're happy or unhappy, make sure that your expressions are matching what you're trying to say, right? Are you feeling happy? Are you feeling really sad right now? How can I help you? Right? Like, you're trying to teach them based on your facial expressions and your gestures. And be aware that some children, they might not get it, right? So give them a mirror. Say, look how I can see you're very upset right now, or I can see you're feeling sad, right? This is sad. Can you tell me why? Or, what do you need, right? Maybe they're getting frustrated with the activity and they're not able to communicate it to you. So you want to use stuff like a mirror or a flashcard, right? Show them pictures of what it looks like, or use a check-ins chart. I can see you're feeling like this. How do I get you to here, right? Try to pair that, because all communication is meaningful. We just have to work a little bit harder sometimes to understand them. Okay. So I'm going to skip past this part because it's a little bit, I thought I'd have a little bit more time, but it's going to be on the slideshow for you to go back on. And these are just like little tips that I have for communicating with parents. I did specifically mention a lot of them in the last one. I just kind of wanted a refresher, but I don't think we're going to have enough time. But I'm going to put them into the slideshow so that you can have it to look at on your own time, okay? But it's just about opening those doors of communication with parents, right? And the one thing I will touch base on, and that I'm very conscious of doing, is to not start a discussion with a complaint, right? When you're greeting the parent, please, please, please praise the child as much as you can. Tell them how extraordinary their child is, because every parent loves to hear it, right? Never, never, never start the conversation with a complaint or any criticism. Being a successful coach, you could definitely initiate the conversation and make that parent feel included by telling them stories, right? About your experiences with the child and all the funny and little unique things that they do in the session that make your time enjoyable and show that their level of learning is increasing, right? Telling those stories relaxes the parent and ensures them that you know and care about their child, and you appreciate teaching and spending time with them, right? Once that parent's really comfortable with your conversation, then you can move towards like whatever the main issues are, right? If they have a behavioral outburst, you could kind of then bring that in, right? And tell the parents how the child is struggling with certain aspects of the program. But definitely make sure you reinforce, that you've noticed this struggle. You're going to keep an eye on it to see how often it's happening, because for children with ADHD and autism, they might, freak out or have a tantrum about this one thing, but then you never see it again. So you want to mentally or physically take track of these behaviors that you're seeing so that you can make sure you're putting different efforts in place to change the behavior. You're not just going to overwhelm parents by telling them they acted like this today. You're going to make sure that you're taking note of it so that you can make small adjustments to improve that behavior and let parents know along the way, right? We don't want to overwhelm them, and especially in school, a lot of educators, unfortunately, will start the discussion with a complaint. So maybe they had a really hard day at school. And when they come in here, they kind of want to make sure that their child is being taken care of. And we do take care of them, but we want to make sure the parents are taken care of as well, right? So now we're going to move into these motivating factors, right? So as educators, we're often balancing the question of whether a child with special needs or specific learning disabilities is doing the best work that they can. And if they're not connected to that material or that activity, right, it's because they're lacking motivation. So how are we going to build motivation? Because a lot of children in today's world, they do lack motivation, especially when it comes to learning new things. For children with disabilities, and like I mentioned before, they have trouble moving away from those activities. So learning new things can be hard. And sometimes it's great when they finally, they learn this new skill, they learn this new activity, but then they can't get away from it because they love it so much, right? So how do we keep that motivation flowing, especially with children with complex needs? We do that through our positive approach, right? And so what I find most beneficial is to focus on the children's abilities, right? Their strengths, not their disabilities or their weaknesses. Most of this is going to come first by observing the child. It takes me at least a week, maybe 4 or 5 sessions before I start to understand what motivates the child. How do they interact with their environment? How are they interacting with me? How are they interacting with their parents? What is that level of communication? How are they manipulating and interacting with the equipment that you're using, right? What are they confident in? What are they not confident in? You want to try to figure out their tolerance levels of these activities, right? And how they're transitioning from one activity to the next. It's a lot of information, but observation is key. You need to do this first before you get anywhere, right? You cannot put in the proper strategies without understanding these levels of motivation. So there's a couple types of motivation. And so we have our intrinsic motivation, right? So children who are motivated naturally, right? They don't need external rewards. These children are satisfied with accomplishing whatever they're accomplishing. They like to try out new things, or they're interested in different situations, and they improve their skills by completing their work and doing these activities, right? These children who don't need this, right? They're not intrinsically motivated, they're extrinsically motivated. So they need things like good grades, rewards, approval, whether it's from the parents or it's educational, right? Now, the thing is, a lot of children are extrinsically motivated. They need to have these rewards in place to feel motivation. There's very little children that are intrinsically motivated. However, it depends on the situation. They might be, right? But internal motivation is actually really hard to maintain because it's the most highly desirable outcome for educators, for coaches, right? However, many children with special needs and learning disabilities, this is not possible. They have difficulty maintaining this kind of motivation, so it needs to be taught. And this is because they struggle with learning with these difficulties, right? They're not able to feel the same level of satisfaction that neurotypical children do when they're working up to something, right? They can experience anxiety and frustration during the task, which outweighs any sense of accomplishment that they feel afterwards. So thankfully, there's tons of strategies in place, and I'm going to be sharing those with you to help increase the child's internal motivation. And some of these strategies can be chosen to help strengthen the individual student or child, and others can be chosen to make the working conditions more favorable. So how are we going to motivate them? We are going to use positive reinforcement. We are going to use verbal praise and positive attention as much as possible, right? These are the most effective rewards for children with autism, with ADHD, and definitely with children with anxiety disorders. Using verbal praise can build that connection because they're going to learn and be able to see what they've accomplished verbally. You're giving them reminders all the time. You're being cheerful, you're reinforcing good behaviors on the spot, and you're being as immediate as possible when doing this. Because praising a child for every right action or giving him or her another way, another try when they give the wrong answer or when they made a mistake builds positive reinforcement, right? We don't want to encourage them and let them know, oh, you're doing this wrong, do this. We're going to praise them for what they do, and then we're going to circle back to it to make sure that we're rewarding them for those positive efforts that they're doing, even if they're doing it completely wrong. We could focus on changing that later, right? So other examples of praise and positive attention are giving them constant reminders of how good they're doing. That's a verbal command, right? Or just be really excited. That's nonverbal when they accomplish a task, right? What's most important is that you're recognizing all attempts of improving. They should receive praise even if they've made those little mistakes, because we comment on their efforts to help build motivation, right? You could say, I love how hard you're working. You are the master at doing challenging things, right? Building that growth mindset. That pendulum ball can't beat you. You're so fast, right? Like just kind of making it fun for them. And like I mentioned before, using rewards or a token system like this is amazing because reward charts are so powerful. And they're great visual ways for children to see their success, right? And you could reward out the wazoo over anything. And once they build up to that task, you're building that internal motivation in the program, right? And you could have them choose a reward that they're working for. Maybe it's extra free time. Maybe it's playing a game of their choice. Maybe, sometimes a lot of children with autism are actually motivated by food. And it's not something you always want to bring into your program, but sometimes that's the only motivation. And I touched on this in the last segment. I offer my parents, like a incentives kind of checklist so that they can mark it off, and they let me know what their child is motivated by. And then I try to make sure I have those options available. So I've had children that are only motivated by food. So I ask parents, can you please provide me with Smarties, Skittles, whatever, so that they work up to this. And then at the very end, they're being provided with this snack that they like. So It doesn't happen all the time, but it might have to. But try to teeter off of those and use things like, having a treasure chest full of art supplies or little trinkets and stuff that they can dip into when they earn all these check marks to build that positive reinforcement. Another area of opportunity that I love to build into my sessions is to use social stories, right? Using social stories can help build, for verbal and nonverbal children, those expectations of behaviors that you really want to see. If they're having trouble self-regulating, you can use social stories as a way to tailor those specific behaviors that you want to see. You're helping them navigate these unfamiliar situations, and building in what you want to see, and they're learning those appropriate social skills and self-regulation skills by having these stories available. So I have a bunch of social stories, like when I'm frustrated, how can I calm down, that kind of stuff. When you see that behavior in action, and if this is something that works for that child, you might have to try it and see if it sticks. If it doesn't, you go on to a different area of coping, right? You might need to bring it out right in that moment so that they can read through the story, have a sense of calming down before they transition back into their activity that was frustrating them, right? Understanding those triggers. Sometimes we want to make sure that we're allowing them to choose specific activities for break time, right? So I have a little break time. This is exactly one that I use all the time. And I tailor it to the activities that they like so that I can build in brain breaks. I can build in activity time at the very end of our session to build rapport, right? That's extremely important, but giving them choice to do it so that we're making sure that this transition is not a transition that's going to frustrate them. And always building in areas to play, right, with the child. And that's building it into the session, because play is very important, especially for children with special needs. It is very, very influential to them to build their communication skills by playing, right? Compared to talk therapy, play therapy is more developmentally appropriate for some of these children whose developmental age might not match their chronological age. So this is an area of them for them to heal, to grow, explore, and learn how to communicate using like special toys and activities and games and stuff like that. So oftentimes when children have issues with communication, right, you want to make sure that you are the voice. You are the voice that to model to them to help build communication. You're going to use simple, repetitive phrases, right, that can build the language skill. And you're going to use the appropriate tone of voice, and you're going to, because doing that will actually help change children who have those more monotone speech patterns, right? Because they're going to learn to match your voice and the rhythms in your voice when you talk. You always want to build in areas for sensory stimulation, right? Sensory play is really essential for children with special needs because it helps them learn how to move their bodies in different ways. They learn how their bodies work, and it's a great area for them to calm their brains down when they're feeling frustrated or overloaded. And they learn through sensory stimulation how to interpret and process the world around them. So this is the big one. So making modifications, so making changes. You only want to modify when it's necessary. When a child has a preferred method of learning and they excel at specific tasks and subjects, as a coach, you need to find little ways to motivate them by maximizing on these strengths, right? The key is to build on their competence with an activity, to start at a level that focuses specifically on certain strengths, and then you gradually increase the expectations of that task or the level of challenge. For example, in the ILS program, I've had many children who struggle with the crossing over knee tap. So first you can have them, and this is an example of modifying the program. We're not changing it, we're just modifying it and accommodating it to them now in their current level, right? Building on their strengths so that they are motivated by it. So what you're going to do, for example, of modifying, you're going to have them, instead of tapping over one knee, right? You're going to figure out where they're competent, and you're going to have them learn how to cross over by alternating, right? So you might first have them tap their knee like one at a time, just linearly, not crossing over, right? And then maybe you can, once they're competent in this, you have them sit crisscross applesauce. So now they're naturally, their knees are in the opposite way. They're not linear anymore. They're kind of outward. And then you could have them learn to cross over, right, by tapping that knee, maybe make that swimming motion, right? Sometimes So they know how to swim. So you're like, make that swimming motion to tap that knee. Once they feel confident in that, you could have them stand up and then maybe they're going to bend over and cross their knees, right? Then you can make that smaller modification to have them stand up, and then they could be able to do it because they've learned all those little individual adjustments. And now they can do the activity on its own, right? So making those modifications allows for the child to receive that proper accommodation for their skill level. And now you're naturally increasing it and you're making it a rewarding and motivating experience, right? And by doing this, making modifications and making specific accommodations helps the child learn not to get discouraged, right? They're not losing confidence in the program and they're not lacking motivation. And that's the whole point of teaching, right? We want to use a variety of methods to help the person understand and master these new skills in a way that benefits them, right? For example, if a child's refusing to separate from the parent at the beginning of the session, an accommodation you can make is to bring the parent into the activity for a few minutes, right? To reduce anxiety, and then you fade the parent out. So that's an example of an accommodation. Another one, maybe the child doesn't have the appropriate motor skills for an activity, right? So you're helping using modeling, helping them go through the motions and making sure that they're practicing on these skills, that they're not strong at daily, right? So that they're becoming more generalized over time. Building in, if you know that they can do, jumping jacks, like no problem, but they struggle with the crisscross tap, right? Make sure you build in jumping jacks so that they're feeling really confident, and then you're going into that more difficult activity. That's going to take time, right? Have them focus on their skills and those areas of success so that they don't get frustrated. So my top 10 pro tips, right? The parents are the greatest resource. Make sure you communicate with them. They know their children better than anybody else, right? And you can learn through them how to accommodate the needs of their child, right? As I talk about all the time, observe, right? Children with special needs react to different sensory elements in every environment. So you want to make sure that you have a safe learning environment for them, and you got to observe how they're interacting it. How are they taking direction? What does frustration look like for them, right? How frustrated are they getting when they're learning something new? How are they able to communicate? This is all done by observing, right? And once you identify each child's stimuli, whether it be like a song, a toy, activity that gives them those positive responses, you want to make sure that you're building that into the session every time, right? Creating that little bit of predictability helps build that rapport, helps ease frustrations, and you can easily incorporate coping skills with these activities if you know what's making them happy. Obviously, we want to engage with a child's uniqueness, right? Every child is unique. And there's definitely no template for working with children with special needs. There is no overall, this is what you do for every child, right? This is why I'm giving you a lot of information, and it's not easy to remember all these things because it is so complex and so diverse. And you might only take away one thing from this, but you want to make sure that you're being flexible and consistent in those approaches of trying new things, because that's how you're going to get these children to respond to you, right? Not being stuck on this one path of doing things. You got to be willing to try everything, and don't rush it, right? Children with special needs require a lot more time, and they need to have things explained differently or have different activities and stuff. So just take your time with it and just let them try everything. And you need to try everything too, right? Make sure we're praising that effort, using our common sense. Sometimes the easiest and best approach is just to use our common sense. Be sure to have fun. Ask those questions. When in doubt, ask questions, right? Ask the child, ask the parents. Even the quiet children can still interact with you and answer your questions, right? So make sure you find out what they're interested in and what boosts their confidence, and make sure that they're participating in those activities to build that relationship. And make sure you're managing your stress, right? Because at the end of the day, everything that we do, it's worth it. And frustration and stress, they don't compare to the satisfaction you feel of when you see that child learning a new skill, right? Or moving to the music, or moving in a way that they haven't before, right? It's why we do what we do. So make sure you just are reminding yourself that it's worth it, and you can do it, right? And when in doubt about how this child is feeling, make sure you ask them, right? They might require a little bit extra attention, a little bit extra patience, but they're going to gain this experience from you, and it's super valuable to them. So make sure you include them, talk to them, ask them questions, praise them, encourage them, guide them, let them try everything, and you be willing to try everything too, right? Just treat them like any other child. So this is where we're going to get into the bulk, okay? These are the triggering behaviors, right? These are the overly intense emotions that we may experience. It's not what we want to see, but we may see it, and we have to know how to handle it, because we're going to be talking about identifying the triggering behaviors, right? So some children have these really big emotions that they won't be able to control, and it will turn into a tantrum or a giant outburst, right? In our world, this is emotional dysregulation. When our kids are not regulated and they start to act out and you see these behaviors, right? It's because that they don't have the skills to manage or express the emotions on their own. So there's a good chance that they don't even know what the emotion they're feeling is, and they can't cope with it. They can't label it. They can't understand it. And that can be difficult, right? And that's a very real possibility that we're going to deal with, and we need to know how to manage it. So we have to understand the two types of emotional regulation. So there's mutual regulation and there's co-regulation. So mutual regulation is your child or this child in your care needs you to help them regulate their emotions, right? When they're upset, you need to help soothe them. You need to help calm them down. They can't use any healthy coping strategies on their own right now. And most kids with autism are really only dependent on mutual regulation. So this is the strategy that you're going to employ. And it's because you need to make sure you're observing the child that you're working with in situations that become frustrating or overwhelming, and making sure that you're remembering, okay, they need me to calm down. They can't do this on your own, right? Sometimes they'll come to you, sometimes they won't. So you need to recognize through the observing, right, how you can be proactive, and you need to ask yourself these questions so that you can choose the right course of action for them. Sometimes they can do it on their own, right? And that's self-regulation. So the child that you are working with can calm down on their own and cope with their emotions all on their own. They might need a little bit of help. They might need reminders to choose an activity because they're feeling frustrated, but usually they can walk away from the frustrated situation and they will calm down a lot quicker once they are given or they choose an activity that helps them calm down, right? And that's the ideal one. We want them to self-regulate, right? But with children with special needs, it's often mutual regulation. So we have to be able to identify these triggering behaviors for them. And identifying triggering behaviors can be really, really hard, right? This is the source of their problem behavior. Children with ADHD, anxiety, and other learning challenges will have meltdowns, and it's because they don't want to do something, or they don't like trying new things. And the first step that we can take in reducing these outbursts is by identifying the trigger. Sometimes we'll see the same trigger over and over and over again. Sometimes the triggers will be different. So we got to make sure we're being proactive and observant. We're watching. We need to understand what it is that happened right before this outburst so that we can make sure that we don't bring these triggers into our sessions all the time. We need to change the behavior around it, right? It's how we handle the tantrums, and consistency is really key here. Setting those rules, setting those boundaries, right, of acceptable and non-acceptable behavior is good. However, when we experience the trigger, what are we going to do about it, right? So to be a little bit more specific for our children with ADHD, many children that have ADHD, especially those who have high impulsivity and high hyperactivity, they have trouble naturally controlling their behavior, right? They find it hard to comply with instructions. They find it hard to switch from one activity to another. And because of that, they might appear defiant or they might become angry, right? So a lot of them will exhibit defiance, and a lot of them will experience emotional outbursts because they're just not into it, right? They are saying no on all levels. And their inability to focus and complete tasks also leads to tantrums. It leads to arguing. It leads to power struggles, right? We don't want that in our session. So we need to figure out what the trigger is so that we can find the appropriate coping skills and self-regulation strategies to reduce these triggers, right? Everything being aware of all of this is to reduce these triggering behaviors so that we're not interacting with severe aggression. For children with anxiety, children who seem angry and defiant, it's often because they have this anxiety inside them, right? If your child has anxiety or struggles with anxiety, they might be trying to hide it. So sometimes when they're hiding it, they have a hard time coping with situations that cause them distress, and they lash out because they're overwhelmed and they're putting pressure on themselves that even they can't handle, right? So when we're dealing with anxiety-inducing situations, their fight or flight instincts are being triggered, right? They're having tantrums and they're refusing to do something because they're trying to avoid this fear, right? And for children with sensory processing issues, they're just having trouble processing all the information around them. They're having trouble processing maybe your verbal commands. They're having trouble, navigating the environment around them. They're having trouble manipulating the activities. All of this is becoming too overwhelming, and they might become oversensitive or maybe even undersensitive to certain stimulation, right? Sometimes scratchy clothes is bothering them and they're like so focused on the scratchy clothes or their socks. I have so many kids who just take their socks off because the socks are bothering them. Or maybe there's too much light. They're closing the windows, right? It's too much. It's making them uncomfortable. It's making them anxious. And because of that, they're distracted and now they're overwhelmed based on the sensory processing of the environment, right? And that can lead to a meltdown as well. So we're looking for these triggering behaviors, right? And for children with ASD, right? With autism, they're the most prone to these dramatic meltdowns, right? And this is like based on my experience, it's because they're so rigid and they need so much consistency in their routine to feel safe. The second they don't feel safe, and sometimes it's unbeknownst to us, we're doing everything to create a safe environment for them. Any small unexpected change will just set them off, right? And we might not be able to see it, but we have to try to understand what was that trigger before, whether it was a sensory issue or what, maybe they're overwhelmed by the task at hand. Maybe they're just having a little short circuit moment where they're having this meltdown, right? And we need to figure out what that trigger is so that they're not consistently overwhelmed and exhausted, because they'll come back into session and they will completely avoid that task that gave them that trigger before, right? And because they might lack the language or the verbal communication skills to express what they want or need, identifying that trigger is even more important. So these are my top tips for de-escalation, right? Do not give in. And what I mean by this is resist the temptation to end the tantrum by giving them what they want, right? It only teaches them that tantrums work. So we want to make sure we're remaining calm and we're being consistent with our expectations, right? You're in a better place to teach them and to follow through with consistent consequences, right? If you do this, then this is what happens, right? When you're in control, you need to be in control, because when you have just like these like brash responses, right, they could escalate the child's aggression even more. So we need to stay calm, use modeling, and reinforce using those self-regulation strategies to get the child from here to here, right? We want to model the behavior we want to see. We're going to ignore these negative behaviors and we're going to praise the positive behaviors, right? You're going to ignore the negative behaviors, because when you do that, when you give it attention to them, like if you're reprimanding them or telling them to stop, you could be reinforcing their actions. So a lot of children with autism, they do not learn that way. They do not learn by saying stop, you need to calm down. You need to show them, you need to model for them, you need to praise them when they are choosing the better approach, right? So you want to encourage these ones. Don't just say good job. You're going to say, you did a really good job calming down. I really like the way you were deep breathing. I really like the way you got up and you went to the pop-it when you were feeling frustrated. Praise those good behaviors, okay? And use consistent consequences. Your child needs to know that there is consequences for negative behaviors, right? Maybe they need time to sit out. You're not putting them in a timeout, right? But what you're doing is you're stopping the behavior, or you're stopping the activity that was frustrating to them. You're allowing them to take another space, right? I have a little corner, pillows, blankets, all that kind of stuff that they can just sit, feel cozy for a second, hug a stuffy, whatever they need, right? But you're not giving them things that are going to reinforce the negative behavior, like giving them iPad time or whatever. Have them read a social story. That's a perfect opportunity to sit down, so they can read and learn, or maybe you're reading to them those appropriate behaviors that you want to see. This is how we build in consequences, right? They're consequences that are going to change behavior because you're using it as instructional time to build on self-regulation strategies. And sometimes what happens is you really want to talk about what it was, especially for those children that are verbal, what was bothering them, but you need to completely wait until that meltdown is over because they're not going to be available to talk to you. You might need to even wait until the next session. I've totally had that where I've, marked it down what made them upset. And I could see that it was like, yes, they were calm and they were able to transition back into the activity. But it wasn't until the next session that I decided to say, hey, you know what? I really noticed that this frustrated you. Can you tell me a little bit more about that now that you're calm? Let me know why it frustrated you. What could we have done? What could I have done to make it better for you? What did you not like? Right? So that you're able to kind of note that so that you're not going to re-trigger that behavior in the future. And my favorite strategy is to build a toolkit for calming down, right? There's so many ways, so many things on Pinterest of how you could build a calm down kit that incorporates a self-regulation strategy of them going to it. Maybe they're taking out breathing cards so that they're learning to relax. Maybe they're playing with a fidget toy. Maybe they're reading a social story, right? It's full of techniques, and it's a really nice way for them to be removed from that triggering situation, those negative behaviors, and experience those positives, right? So we're trying to build in and we're trying to create calm for them, right? We're keeping calm ourselves. We're providing them with positive attention, providing them with positive praise, making sure our rules, our expectations, our boundaries are very clear. We're giving them options when they're frustrated. We're identifying triggers for them when they're not able to, and we're providing them with self-regulation options so that we can build their problem-solving skills, right? And now I'm going to go more specifically into some specific ones that I use for children with special needs, okay? So using choice boards. This is one that I find really, really helpful because one, we're encouraging choice making, but we're giving children who aren't used to having a sense of control over their environment, right? Having a yes/no board during an activity can help them communicate their preferences. So it's important just to keep in mind that we're building functional communication by using this, right? You're reinforcing your communication and their comprehension by asking clarity, right? Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes or no? You could easily say, I would love to move into this activity next. Are you ready? Yes or no, right? For children that are nonverbal, you could check their level of understanding. Do you need me to repeat it again? Yes or no, right? Lots of areas of opportunity for you to use the yes or no system, whichever one you choose. I use it all the time, and I have it on my little lanyard all the time. So the next one I like to do is by structuring rejection and refusal. We don't like it when children say no to us. We don't like it when they don't want to do what we want to do. It takes away from our time. It takes away from, everything that we've set up and built in for them, right? But the thing is, when children don't like an activity, right, they should be able to express that. And we want to teach them to express it properly, right? We want to teach them saying, they will naturally say, like, I don't like it, right? I don't want to. Let's try to reframe it. I like to reframe it by teaching them to say stop, right? Because stop is one word. You can use it in a visual for our children who are nonverbal, right? It makes it easier for them to refuse or reject something without having to go into the negotiation, especially for those children that are verbal, right? They'll be like, I don't like it. I want to do this instead, blah, 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 blah. We're just going to teach them, like, stop. Okay, we're going to stop this and we're going to maybe move to something else, right? Right now it's not working, so we're stopping. We're going to be proactive and avoid those tantrums, right? Because we remember, if they don't like what they're doing, they're not motivated by the task, what are we going to get? Negative behavior, right? So teaching them stop or showing us stop in a visual can help them learn a proactive strategy, right? We're not giving them what they want, but maybe we're stopping right now and then we're coming back and we're doing it at a later time, right? We're just stopping right now because they're getting frustrated. And especially if they're not verbal, you want to use it on a visual. Sometimes I put it on a popsicle stick. I have it available and ready to use so that they can just show me, right? we want to make sure that we're using this as a way of communication. And then we're using it as an area of opportunity for them, right? We're acknowledging and reinforcing their communication however possible. We don't want to force them to complete an activity, right? Especially when they have communication deficits. But instead, we want to keep track of like how long they're able to handle that activity, right? Use a visual timer, use a timer on your phone, because we want to increase tolerance over time, right? And if they're starting to feel frustrated, we're using these like the stop for them to refuse or reject, right, this activity. And then we're going to use this as an opportunity to build in something like movement breaks or the calm down toolkit, or these self-regulation strategies, so that we're not being hit with those tantrum behaviors. And instead, we're just building on positive behavior, right? And I always mention this one because it's my favorite, is using the emotions chart, right? Super, super simple. When a child's getting upset or too excited, right, they might demonstrate these behaviors that are disruptive. So we want to teach them to go to a feelings chart so that they can express their emotions functionally, right? They're building their communication. For children with specific special needs who are verbal and they can use their natural speech when they're overwhelmed, they'll be able to tell us, I'm sad, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, right? For children who aren't, they might need to come over and they might need to point, or you might need to prompt them, hey, show me how you're feeling right now. Or you show them, hey, when we do this activity, I see your number 4. How do we get to number 1? What do you need? You're helping them build those self-regulation skills naturally, right? And we're building intrinsic motivation when we do this and when we notice this, right? Trying to prevent those triggering behaviors from exploding and creating big emotional outbursts, right? Because functional communication skills is the most important, especially with kids with special needs, right? And they're not able to do it. This is going to help improve their quality of communication to you so that you don't experience those negative behaviors more regularly. So these are the strategies that I don't use all the time. You can't use all of these in one session, but they are ones that you should be comfortable with. They are ones that work. So these are specific strategies for building that mutual regulation, right? They need your help. So these are things that you can have accessible to them when they are experiencing a triggering behavior, right? Maybe you need to play a mindfulness game. Maybe you are modeling that behavior on your own, right? You're using positive reinforcement. You're using a token system, right? You're offering them a break. I always have break cards. Also, too, for our children who are very young, right? If they're grabbing the stop sign or they're telling you stop, use this as an area, as an opportunity to build in a break, right? Oh, I see you're feeling really upset. You need to take a break because you need to calm down, right? What can you do to calm down? Have coping skills posters of different strategies that they can use or point to, so that we're removing those triggers and building in coping skills, right? Have a visual schedule. I love visual schedules. It shows them what's coming next so that their anxiety is eased and we're able to transition from one to the next, right? First then boards as well. Those social stories, right? First we're working, then we're breaking. They're going to be able to build these intrinsic motivation into your session by using these types of skills. We all have sensory items, use them when you need them, right? Always visualize as well. Sometimes if a child doesn't want to engage in any of these activities, having them sit down and you coaching them, I want you to close your eyes and picture what makes you happy. Picture a time where you were really, really like laughing so hard. Can you tell me about that? Can you draw it for me if they can't tell you about it, right? Make sure you have a reward system in place that works for them. Make sure you're really managing their feelings. We talked a lot about that in part 1, right? Try to understand their feelings, how big their feelings are, and making sure that you're doing a check-in or check-out when they're coming to you so that you can understand their level of feeling and awareness in the situation and the session, right? And then, so these are our self-regulation strategies. They're able to do it all on their own. They might need reminders. If you see that a triggering behavior happen, you're going to say, hey, now would be a really, really good time to use your coping skills. What do you need to do? Maybe they'll say, I need to take a deep breath. I need to listen to some music. I need to squeeze a ball. I need to hug a stuffed animal, right? These are all things that are going to be accessible to them and they'll be able to do on their own or they might just need a gentle reminder, right? We're moving mutual regulation strategies over to self-regulation strategies. And self-regulation strategies, these are only 25 of them, but there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds out there. So you just need to pick ones that work for you, ones that are easy, accessible, right? But these are the ones that children often love. Sitting there, blowing some bubbles, maybe bouncing on a ball, building Lego, chewing a piece of gum, especially for our bigger kids, like helps a lot. They just love chewing bubble gum. It just helps their brains kind of rewire, calm down through their senses, right? Popping the bubble wrap, stuff like that. So these are tons and tons of strategies, and they are all listed here, but they are also shared, like how to build a tool, calm down kit, how to build a sensory bottle, like the picture there. They are all put into our Google Drive, so they are all easily accessible and there for you when you need them. And I'm done.